Hey y'all, I'm in Boulder, Colorado this morning, visiting the Integral Center, which has kind of been the mothership of authentic relating and circling practices, and it's closing down, so it's a bittersweet weekend being here. And I really want to show you guys the mountains. I wish it wasn't backlit to film against those. Maybe I can turn this around for a sec. Maybe you can see. Maybe not. Anyways, it's beautiful here. And being at the Integral Center, marking this transition, had me think about community and building community and what does that look like. And I wanted to riff on that for a little bit because I find that the way I've built community often occurs to people as different, and it's been successful in its own way. So maybe these can be some tips, as I know a lot of you out there are looking to build groups where you can feel at home and where you can host events and practices for other people to benefit from. So when I first started building community in Austin back in 2012, I had one other co-facilitator, and eventually another joined. And it was just us really doing most everything for several months at the beginning, which was exhilarating. Like, it was wonderful to learn. We used to get together in co-op kitchens and plan things out, and really became close bonding on this project that we were doing. But after a while, it became exhausting, being the only leaders. We started training other facilitators, and there was this really interesting process for me of learning how to build a community without being the hub of everything. Like, I became aware over time that I was the bottleneck, that whether or not I was leading, things kind of went through me, people looked to me, and if I left, the community's center of gravity would go away. I didn't want that. So these are some of kind of the things I did and practices that I learned over time that helped me build community and step away from it and do that again and again. So the first thing is lead until you don't have to. So there does need to be somebody leading at the beginning of a community, at the beginning of an event, a meeting, whatever it is. We need to know that someone is in charge, or there's a leadership vacuum which someone then steps into. There's always a person, unless you're such a close group, so comfortable with each other that you're all leading. But that usually takes years to get to, or a certain level of skill. So as a leader, the first thing you do is you set the space. You say the frame. Like, this is what our community is. These are the practices we do. These are maybe our agreements or our ways of being. And you let people then discover what that means to them. Like, cool, so what do you want from this community? What does this look like to you? What are we doing? You gradually hand over more and more leadership, become the person who talks less and less. And I like this idea of becoming the air that people breathe. They don't even necessarily know that they're breathing it, but they need air until at some point they're able to breathe on their own. And you'll notice that when you're really able to step back and the community still keeps going. And there's this idea of that I found of abdicating and not delegating. So if I'm the leader and I'm stepping back and I'm leaving the space open, I can say, okay, I want you to do this. I want this to happen. I want us to have an event this Sunday, and I want it to have 20 people at it, and the theme is going to be relationship. Who are we in relationship? What do we want? Any of that. And you say, hey, community member, would you do this? Now, their response can be really yes or no. And a lot of the time people will say yes, and they won't really mean it. And then the thing won't get done, and you'll feel frustrated. And the reason is because it's your idea, it's not theirs. So they have to be the kind of person that feels comfortable just following along. And, sorry, there's a dog in this car next to me. And if they're not, then the thing doesn't get done. So really, the other idea, the way to do things is to abdicate, not delegate. To give something up. To say, all right, what do we want to do? We want an event this Sunday. Cool. Who wants to lead an event? Sweet, I'm here if you need coaching. Here's some resources. What do you want to do? Maybe have that conversation with them. But then it's their responsibility. And it needs to be something that you're willing to let go of. And you need to decide what are the things that you're willing to let go of and what aren't. And the things that you're not willing to are the ones that maybe you hold on to. And the other ones, you let other people have their vision. When I first stepped out of the Austin community, I moved to Boulder for a summer to study here. And my community, I left it in the hands of other facilitators. And they kept it going, but it was gradually on less and less of a basis. Fewer people were coming. And I came back and I was like, where's my community? And I kind of built it back up again. And the thing that I learned is like, abdication works best when you abdicate, and then you take a look at what's happening and you kind of like tweak it. You're like, okay, so like this is like the extra piece that we need that I didn't know. Another example of that is the authentic relating retreats that I run. Last summer, I set up a retreat, and then I went on birthright to Israel. And the 2-3 weeks before the retreat, I wasn't going to be in contact at all. There was no way I could set up the last bits of the retreat by myself. So I put together this like crazy massive spreadsheet of all the roles that needed to happen before a retreat and the timeline that they needed to be done in. And then I found a team of people that I really trusted. We'll talk about that in a second. And I said, okay, guys, can you do this? And they said, yes. And I stepped away for a bit. And then, a week or two later, I looked at the timeline and I was like, okay, so these things aren't getting done. Like, what is it? What am I missing? Everyone knows their tasks. We've got like the Slack thread set up. We've got the Facebook group for the leads. We've got like all the infrastructure, but it's not happening. So like, what do I need to tweak? And I went, oh, duh, the human element. Like, my team needs to meet with each other first. They need to find out who each other is. They need to find their own rationale for what they're going to do and why they're going to do it. And the spreadsheet can be a guideline. But I and what I create have to be the guideline. They can't be the internal motivator. So I asked the team lead to set up a meeting with everyone. He set up a meeting. I wasn't even there. I didn't even hear what they did, but the team was off. And I came back in 2 days before the retreat and helped lead, and they'd done it. And because they'd done it once, and this is the thing about abdicating, when somebody does something once, they're likely to do it again. And so this last retreat too, I cooked. I was in the kitchen. Everyone else led. So that's one thing. Abdicate, not delegate. And I'll say the reason for this. When a space is filled, when there's a leader, we don't step into it. It's like some part of us turns off. Like, we only use as much mental energy as we have to. And if we don't have to use the mental energy to think about, okay, what do we do next? And is the room safe? And like, who's got this handle on it? Like, we just don't. And so you won't realize that you're taking up space until you step out of it. And that's one of the reasons that if you want people to learn to lead, you have to occasionally step out of the room. Like, it doesn't matter if you're still in the room and you're not leading, you still are the leader. You're still having an impact. I've had some of the greatest creativity come out of my courses when I was like, peace out, I'm going to lunch for an hour, you guys lead yourself. And it's amazing. So another idea on that is give people a little bit of a theory and a lot of practice. Put them into leadership, have them trying things as much as possible. If we don't do that, if we're always kind of just like getting theory or trying an exercise but never really doing the thing that we're going to use it in, it's kind of like sparring if you've ever done martial arts. Like, you're fighting with somebody, but you're always stopping your fist before you hit them because you don't want to hurt them, right? Well, when you get in a real fight, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to be fighting with someone, you need to defend yourself, and you're going to stop your fist before you hit them because we do what we've practiced. So if you never let people actually practice what they're going to need, they don't learn it. And that means opening up the space. That means stepping back some. And so one of the ways I do this is if someone comes to me with a question or a complaint, I say, cool, let me help you figure out how you can experiment with that. And one of my last facilitator trainings, I had someone who was really dissatisfied with the training. It was going too slow for him. He wanted like more edge, more intensity, more quick learning. And with someone like that in the group, it really influences everyone else. And so there was like this kind of like crunchy, uncertain feeling. And I was starting to get upset with him because I was like, fuck, like as a leader, like what do I do? And I'm losing my leadership. And and I feel threatened and challenged and like unwanted. And so eventually he and I like stepped aside for a private conversation, and I said, okay, like what is it that's not working for you? What's your complaint? And he told me about it, and I went, I don't know how to solve that, because I don't have a clear enough idea of exactly what it is that you're wanting. I get that there's something you're not liking, but I don't want to create something without knowing. So I have a challenge for you. Will you come back by the end of the day and tell me something that you could do with the whole group to resolve your complaint? And I will give you the time. I'll give you 15 to 20 minutes with this group of 40 people to do what you need to do to resolve your issue. And he did it. And it was brilliant. And he's been leading ever since, because he got the chance to do that and try it. And he saw what happened. And sometimes with this, people crash and burn, but if they do, you're there to help build them back up. You don't step out entirely. You let them know you have a hand on their back, but you don't let them always lean back on you. So, 2 more things. Number 1, you do want to make sure that you're picking the right leaders. Not everybody is set out to be a leader. There's this beautiful idea I heard lately of the 10-80-10 rule. And what that means is that in any given group, 10 of the people are leaders, 10% of the people are leaders, 80% are followers, and 10% are kind of troublemakers. If you want to transform a culture, and I learned this from a group in Vancouver that kind of goes into dilapidated areas like tenements with a lot of drugs and crime, and finds a way to really like recreate the culture inside of them, like make them positive places to live. And what they do is they look for the 10% of natural leaders. And I imagine you can find this just by talking to people in a group. Like, who do they look to for advice? Who do they see as a leader? It's not always necessarily the person that you would think. Who shows up that way? And you take those people out to coffee. And you say, what do you need? You don't solve it for them. You don't come in and impose your culture on the group. You find the natural leaders. And if you're starting a community, it's the same thing. Start noticing who in your group do people respond most to. Who do you feel most comfortable around even? Although be a little bit wary of that, because the people we feel most comfortable around or who are most charismatic are not always the natural leaders. Sometimes they're the ones that speak loudest or are most kind of appealing. Find the people that actually like add value with everything that they do. And then you go out to lunch with those people. Go out to coffee. Say, how can we collaborate? What do you need? And you give them what they need. And they will pull everyone else along with them. And the 10% of people that are troublemakers will often come on board. You don't have to deal with that, they will. So look out for your leaders, and don't assume that just because somebody volunteers that they're the right person. Like, choose carefully. Even if you have an open community, which we do, like almost anybody can step in and become a leader, we still have this kind of natural mentorship system where people learn from each other, and we don't kind of let people come to the point of just leading events on their own and mentoring a team until they've gone through some sort of process. And that process is partly subjective, because you have to really get a sense for who the right leaders are, and it's not always something that you can lay out on paper. Last thing that I thought of when planning this is me as a leader. What qualities do I need to have? There's one thing, which is like being unattached to some degree to being seen as a leader. Like, or it's more like my value doesn't depend on what I do. Me being in front of the room isn't the most important thing. And what I found is I've stepped away from this, like, yeah, I still want to be seen as a leader. Like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get over that. The reason I want it is because it gives me a place in the group. And I'm scared of losing that. And so I want people to know that, like, I'm the founder, I'm the leader. But I don't have to do that as overtly as I often thought that I did. I can be the leader by being the mentor. It's this idea of being the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage. I can be the leader by being in the kitchen, and my crew comes to me when they need advice and help, and I let them know that I'm there for that. So one thing is really checking your ego and figuring out why you're doing what you're doing and staying true to your values, really knowing what you're committing to and making sure that you're accountable to that. And the last thing is transparency. People trust what they can feel. And if they can't feel you, they don't trust you as well. And so the quickest way to dispel leadership projections is just to make yourself human over and over again. Tell people what you're going through. Tell them what you're wanting and needing. Be positive about what you're creating, but not to the point of hiding. And sometimes that feels like dying over and over again, exposing yourself. But the community only goes as deep as the leader goes. And so you need to be the one to dive first.